Imagine for a moment that the very way you see the world, the way you process sound, light, words, and faces was fundamentally different from almost everyone around you. What you find overwhelming, they find ordinary. What you notice in vivid detail, they overlook completely. Now ask yourself, is that a disorder, or is that simply another version of being human? This question lies at the heart of what we're really trying to understand when we ask, what do we actually know about autism? Autism is often referred to as a spectrum, and that phrase carries with it a depth of meaning that is crucial to understand. When we use the word spectrum, we're pointing towards something that doesn't conform to a rigid category or a simple binary distinction. It's not a matter of autistic or not autistic, as if the condition exists in isolation, sharply separated from what we consider typical human behavior. Rather, autism exists along a continuum of traits, abilities, and difficulties, and this continuum shades imperceptibly into what we might otherwise label as ordinary variations in personality and cognition. To say autism is a spectrum is to acknowledge its complexity, and the complexity of human beings more broadly, because the lines that define it are porous, shifting, and contextual rather than absolute. Think about it this way. Every person, whether neurotypical or not, has strengths and weaknesses in perception, communication, and social understanding. Some of us are more socially skilled, while others are more detail-oriented or more introverted. Autism intensifies or alters these traits, sometimes to the point where they become dramatically noticeable. But that doesn't mean the individual is defined entirely by them. Instead, they represent one dimension of an extraordinarily complex human being. The spectrum idea captures this reality. It reminds us that what we call autism is not a singular, easily identifiable phenomenon that looks the same in every case. It can range from individuals who are nonverbal and require lifelong support to those who can function independently, even excelling in specialized fields. This breadth is essential to grasp because it resists simplistic definitions and forces us to think carefully about what it means to be human in the first place. The spectrum metaphor also explains why diagnosis is so challenging. Two people might share the same label, yet their behavior, needs, and capacities may differ radically. One child may struggle profoundly with language development, while another might speak fluently but find social reciprocity bewildering. One adult may be unable to tolerate unexpected changes in routine, while another might navigate life with apparent adaptability, though inwardly experiencing a constant battle with sensory overload. That variability tells us that autism isn't simply a checklist of symptoms, but rather a pattern of differences that emerge in diverse ways depending on context, personality, and environment. This variability is also why it is misleading to think of autism purely in terms of deficit. Yes, there are difficulties associated with it, sometimes very serious ones. But along the same spectrum, there can be exceptional abilities, intense focus, remarkable memory, unique problem-solving skills, and unconventional creativity. To treat autism as a monolithic problem is to miss the richness of its manifestations. The spectrum concept obliges us to respect individuality, to see each person not as a representative of a category, but as someone with a distinct combination of traits. It forces us to drop our tendency to categorize human beings neatly and instead confront the messy, intricate reality of human variation in its most striking form. Autism is deeply rooted in neurological differences, and that recognition changes the way we should think about it. When researchers study the brains of individuals on the spectrum, they find patterns that diverge from what is considered typical in areas related to communication, sensory processing, and social interaction. These are not arbitrary differences. They are biological realities grounded in the very architecture of the nervous system. The way neurons connect, the speed at which signals are transmitted, and the balance between excitation and inhibition in neural networks all contribute to the experience of autism. This is not something that arises purely from upbringing or cultural influence, but is embedded in the very wiring of the brain, shaping how the individual perceives and interacts with the world. At the same time, to say that autism is neurologically based does not mean it has a single identifiable cause. The evidence points strongly toward genetics playing a significant role. Families with autistic members often have other relatives who display traits of the spectrum. Even if they are not formally diagnosed, specific genes have been implicated, though not one in isolation. It is a constellation of genetic variations that seem to increase the likelihood of autistic traits, and different combinations can lead to different outcomes. This genetic complexity mirrors the variability of the spectrum itself, making it nearly impossible to reduce autism to a single biological explanation. However, it would also be a mistake to ignore the environment. Genes do not act in a vacuum. The expression of genetic predispositions is influenced by countless factors: prenatal conditions, maternal health, exposure to certain chemicals, and even the stresses and supports present in early life. But here again, nuance is critical. Too often, the search for environmental causes leads to overly simplistic or even harmful conclusions. People latch onto conspiratorial claims about vaccines or singular pollutants, but the science consistently refutes these notions. Autism cannot be explained by one external factor, nor can it be prevented by eradicating a single environmental influence. Instead, the relationship between genes and environment is dynamic, a constant interplay that shapes development in subtle and unpredictable ways. Recognizing autism as a product of neurological difference also challenges how we frame it morally and socially. If someone is born with a brain that processes information differently, it is not the result of failure, neglect, or deliberate choice. It is a fact of biology that should shift the conversation away from blame and toward understanding. Parents are not at fault, and individuals themselves are not at fault. Rather, they are navigating a world that is often built for minds that operate differently from theirs. By grounding our understanding in biology, we create space for compassion, because we see autism less as a moral deficiency and more as a human variation with specific challenges and specific potentials. The neurological foundation of autism also provides direction for interventions. If the differences are rooted in how the brain functions, then strategies that support learning, communication, and adaptation need to be designed with that in mind. Behavioral therapies, educational supports, and sensory accommodations become tools not to cure, but to enable flourishing. The recognition of neurological difference, therefore, invites a deeper respect for human diversity and a commitment to helping people succeed within the conditions of their own unique mind. One of the most serious mistakes people make when thinking about autism is to reduce individuals to diagnostic labels. When someone is told they are autistic, the risk is that this label begins to overshadow the entirety of who they are. It becomes easy to treat the person as if they are simply a collection of symptoms rather than a complex human being with their own history, temperament, and aspirations. While diagnostic categories serve a purpose in science and medicine, they can also flatten the richness of individuality if they are not applied with care. Each person who falls somewhere on the autism spectrum is not merely an autistic, but a son or daughter, a friend, a colleague, a thinker, and a dreamer. And to forget that is to commit an injustice both to them and to ourselves. Labels have power. They can shape the expectations of teachers, employers, and even family members. Once someone is categorized, others begin to interpret every behavior through the lens of that label. A child who avoids eye contact is not just shy but autistic. An adult who struggles in a crowded room is not simply overwhelmed but autistic. The nuance disappears, and everything gets explained away by a single word. This reductionist thinking strips away individuality and locks people into boxes they cannot escape. It fails to account for the fact that no two people with autism are alike, and that the diversity within the spectrum is as vast as the diversity outside of it. What complicates the matter further is that individuals with autism often develop unique coping strategies or strengths that cannot be captured by a label. One child may discover a love for mathematics and display extraordinary skill in pattern recognition, while another may cultivate artistic abilities that allow them to express themselves in ways that language cannot. If all we see is the label, we risk overlooking these strengths entirely. We begin to define the person by their limitations rather than their possibilities, which has profound consequences for their sense of self, worth, and for the opportunities society is willing to extend to them. It is important to understand that identity is shaped in dialogue with how others perceive us. If a child constantly hears that they are autistic, before they are recognized as capable, intelligent, or creative, that message sinks in. They may come to believe they are defined by their struggles rather than their potential. This is not just an academic concern, but a practical one. The way we see people influences how we treat them, and how we treat them influences how they see themselves. When we reduce individuals to labels, we do more than misdescribe them. We limit their horizons and diminish their opportunities to flourish. To counteract this, we must discipline ourselves to hold both realities at once. The diagnostic category is useful for guiding research, providing support, and securing resources, but the individual always exceeds the category. A label might tell us something about what challenges a person faces, but it can never capture who that person is in their entirety. That means when we encounter someone on the autism spectrum, the first responsibility is not to view them as a diagnosis, but as a person with a unique story, a distinct voice, and a particular way of seeing the world. Autism is frequently spoken about in terms of what it takes away, but that is only half of the story. To understand autism properly, we have to acknowledge that it involves both challenges and potential gifts. The challenges are evident and deserve attention. Difficulties with communication, struggles in social reciprocity, sensory sensitivities that can turn ordinary environments into overwhelming experiences, and the need for routine that can clash with the unpredictability of daily life. These difficulties are real, and they can make participation in school, work, and social activities profoundly complicated. Yet if we stop there, if we view autism solely through the lens of limitation, we blind ourselves to another truth: that many individuals on the spectrum possess abilities and modes of perception that can be extraordinary. Consider the way in which intense focus manifests in some people with autism. Where many find it difficult to sustain attention on a single task, some individuals on the spectrum can concentrate with remarkable depth. That capacity for sustained attention can lead to expertise in areas that demand precision, patience, and detail. Fields like mathematics, computer programming, engineering, and even the arts have benefited from minds that process information differently. The very traits that pose challenges in one setting may transform into unique strengths in another. What appears to be an obstacle in a classroom full of distractions might reveal itself as a gift in a laboratory or studio where careful observation and persistence are required. The same applies to systematic or analytical thinking. Many autistic individuals show a preference for patterns, structures, and systems. They see regularities and inconsistencies in ways others might overlook. This capacity can be frustrating in social life, where nuance and ambiguity dominate, but in problem-solving domains it becomes an asset. Some of the greatest scientific and technological breakthroughs may well have been facilitated by people whose cognitive style diverged from the norm. History suggests that progress is often driven by those who refuse to see the world in the same way as everyone else, and autism represents one of the ways such divergence manifests. Creativity, too, can be shaped by autistic traits. While people often assume creativity is tied to free association and flexibility, it also depends on the ability to notice details others ignore and to explore an idea with relentless dedication. Artistic expression among autistic individuals sometimes takes unconventional forms, challenging prevailing assumptions about what art should be. That difference can enrich cultural life by broadening the boundaries of what is possible. Even in everyday settings, unique ways of perceiving and responding can offer fresh perspectives, forcing families, educators, and communities to reconsider assumptions about communication, empathy, and intelligence. Recognizing autism as involving both challenge and gift does not romanticize the condition or deny the very real struggles faced by those who live with it. Instead, it allows us to hold a more balanced and truthful view. The difficulties are genuine, but so are the potentials. To see only the hardship is to underestimate the person. To see only the talent is to dismiss the struggle. It is in acknowledging both that we approach a fuller understanding of what autism represents in the human story. Interventions and structured support are among the most important elements in helping individuals on the autism spectrum navigate life more effectively. Autism presents unique challenges that can make ordinary situations, school environments, social gatherings, workplaces extremely difficult to manage. But when interventions are designed with sensitivity to the neurological differences at play, the outcomes can be transformative. The aim is not to erase autism or force conformity to arbitrary norms, but to provide tools, skills, and supports that allow individuals to thrive in their own ways. The research on early intervention, for instance, shows that structured programs focused on communication, behavior, and social interaction can improve outcomes significantly, particularly when they are adapted to the specific needs of the child. Structure itself plays a crucial role because predictability reduces the overwhelming uncertainty that can be paralyzing for many autistic individuals. Routines offer stability, and stability fosters confidence. Something as simple as a visual schedule can allow a child to anticipate what comes next, thereby lowering anxiety and making engagement possible. In schools, structured teaching methods that break tasks into smaller, manageable steps can enable learning that would otherwise feel unattainable. When adults provide this kind of support, they are not diminishing independence but building a scaffold that allows independence to grow. Over time, many individuals internalize these structures and carry them forward into adult life, where they can become coping strategies for navigating complex social or occupational settings. Support also includes specialized therapies that target areas of difficulty, Speech therapy can help develop communication skills. Occupational therapy can address sensory sensitivities and motor difficulties. And behavioral therapies can teach adaptive strategies for managing challenging situations. While no single intervention works universally, the principle remains: when supports are tailored, they can dramatically improve quality of life. Importantly, interventions must also evolve as the person matures. A child may benefit from different strategies than an adolescent or adult. And flexibility in support is just as critical as structure itself. Family involvement cannot be overstated in this process. Families often provide the most consistent support, and when they are educated about autism and trained in supportive strategies, the home environment becomes a place of empowerment rather than conflict. A family that understands sensory triggers or communication barriers can adapt routines and expectations, reducing unnecessary stress. This not only helps the individual with autism, but also strengthens family bonds, as interactions shift from frustration to mutual understanding. Communities, too, play a vital role. Inclusive schools, workplaces willing to accommodate differences, and public spaces designed with sensory needs in mind all extend the reach of structured support beyond the private sphere into the shared world. The underlying message is that interventions and support do not eliminate autism, but rather create pathways for individuals to live more fully. Without them, difficulties can dominate. With them, strengths have room to emerge. The presence of structure and support can mean the difference between isolation and participation, between dependency and autonomy, between a life defined by limitation and a life defined by possibility. Family and societal understanding form the foundation upon which the lives of individuals with autism are built. Autism does not exist in isolation. It exists within relationships, within families, within schools, workplaces, and communities. The way others respond to autistic traits can either amplify the challenges or create a space where growth and contribution become possible. A child who is constantly misunderstood or criticized for behaviors that stem from neurological differences may internalize shame and retreat further into isolation, while the same child in an environment of patience and acceptance may find the confidence to explore their strengths. Understanding, therefore, is not merely a matter of kindness, but a practical necessity for fostering development. Families are often the first and most important source of this understanding. Parents, siblings, and extended relatives play a central role in shaping how an autistic individual experiences the world. When families educate themselves about autism, they begin to see that behaviors often perceived as stubbornness, rudeness, or indifference are in fact expressions of sensory overload, communication barriers, or difficulty in interpreting social cues. That shift in perception changes everything. Instead of punishment, there is guidance. Instead of rejection, there is support. A family that responds with empathy can become a secure base, offering the consistency and reassurance that help the individual face the complexities of the outside world. Societal understanding is equally critical. Schools, for example, often operate on assumptions about how children should learn and behave, assumptions that do not always fit autistic students. Without accommodations, these students may be labeled as disruptive or unmotivated, when in reality the environment is simply not suited to their needs. Teachers who are trained to recognize and adapt to autism can transform the educational experience. A quiet space during recess, a modified assignment, or the allowance of alternative communication methods can make the difference between failure and flourishing. This principle extends into adulthood as well. Workplaces that value diversity and provide accommodations such as flexible schedules, sensory friendly spaces, or clear communication practices can unlock the potential of employees who might otherwise be excluded. The wider community also has a responsibility. Public awareness campaigns, inclusive recreational programs, and social initiatives can normalize difference rather than stigmatize it. When society at large moves toward understanding, individuals with autism are less likely to be marginalized. They are given the opportunity to participate, to contribute, and to be recognized not only for their struggles, but also for their abilities. This reduces isolation and builds a culture of belonging, which benefits everyone, not just those on the spectrum. Understanding, however, is not the same as indulgence. It requires balance. Families and societies must provide support without lowering expectations to the point of neglecting potential. Compassion must be coupled with encouragement, patience with discipline, and accommodation with challenge. The ultimate goal is not to shelter individuals from life, but to equip them to meet life on terms that acknowledge their differences without diminishing their humanity. In this way, family and societal understanding become forces that nurture both resilience and dignity. Science continues to show us that autism is not reducible to a single cause, and this complexity is one of the most important truths to grasp. The desire to find a neat, simple explanation for why autism occurs is natural, because human beings prefer clear answers. We want a single culprit, a single mechanism, a single point of blame or hope. But autism resists that tendency. It emerges from multiple pathways, influenced by both biological and environmental factors, and no single variable has ever been sufficient to explain the full range of the spectrum. This is why research consistently points to autism as multidimensional, layered and varied in expression, defying simplistic categorization. Genetic studies provide strong evidence for this complexity. There is no single autism gene. Instead, researchers have identified hundreds of genetic variations that may play a role, each contributing a small degree of risk. Some of these genes are connected to synaptic development, others to brain connectivity, and still others to the regulation of neural signaling. The combinations differ from person to person, which is why two individuals with the same diagnosis can present such dramatically different traits. What we are observing is not a straightforward chain of cause and effect, but an intricate web of biological influences interacting in ways we are only beginning to understand. Environmental factors add another layer of complexity. Prenatal conditions, maternal health, exposure to certain toxins, and even complications during birth have all been implicated as contributing influences. Yet none of these factors alone can account for autism. They act in interaction with genetic predispositions, sometimes amplifying them, sometimes moderating them. This interplay between genes and environment highlights the dynamic nature of human development, which is always a negotiation between inherited potential and lived experience. Attempting to reduce autism to either pure genetics or pure environment misses the truth that it arises from the continuous dialogue between the two. This scientific complexity has implications for treatment and understanding. Because autism does not have a single cause, it cannot have a single solution. Interventions must be tailored to the individual, recognizing that what helps one person may not help another. A therapy effective for a child with significant communication delays may be irrelevant for another child whose main struggle is sensory processing. Understanding autism as multidimensional forces us to abandon the idea of one size fits all approaches and to embrace flexibility, creativity, and attentiveness in our support strategies. The refusal of autism to conform to simple explanations is also a lesson in humility. It reminds us that human beings are extraordinarily complex organisms, and our attempts to categorize and explain must always remain provisional. Oversimplification not only distorts the science but also leads to misguided public policies, ineffective treatments, and stigmatization of individuals. The more we recognize the layered and dynamic nature of autism, the more responsibly we can respond to it. Rather than clinging to simplistic answers, we are called to accept the challenge of complexity, to approach autism with patience, and to recognize that its mysteries mirror the broader mysteries of human life itself. Humility is essential when we speak about autism because, despite the advances of science, there remains far more that we do not know than what we do. Too often, experts and institutions fall into the trap of overstating their certainty. They want to reassure the public, secure funding, or appear authoritative, and so they present conclusions as if they were final. But the truth is that our understanding of autism is still developing, still partial, still open to revision as new discoveries emerge. Intellectual humility means being honest about the limits of our knowledge and resisting the temptation to close the case prematurely. It is the willingness to say, "Here are the facts we can verify, here are the patterns we think are reliable, and here are the areas where we are still in the dark." Acknowledging what we do not know is not a weakness but a strength. It prevents us from being carried away by simplistic theories and harmful practices. Throughout history, autism has been subject to misguided explanations that were offered with great confidence. Decades ago, some psychologists insisted that autism was caused by cold or unloving mothers, a theory that inflicted tremendous guilt and suffering on families. Later, conspiracy-driven claims about vaccines spread fear and misinformation, distracting attention from genuine research and delaying progress. In both cases, arrogance masquerading as certainty caused real harm. Humility protects us from repeating such errors because it keeps us open to correction and attentive to evidence rather than ideology. Humility also changes the way we relate to individuals on the spectrum. If we believe we already understand everything about autism, we are less likely to listen to the voices of those who live with it. But when we admit that our knowledge is incomplete, we leave space for their experiences to inform us. Autistic individuals and their families often know details of daily life, coping mechanisms, and perspectives that science has not yet captured. To disregard this lived knowledge in favor of rigid theories is not only arrogant but also counterproductive. Humility demands that we integrate scientific research with the testimony of those most directly affected. In practical terms, humility guides the creation of support systems. It encourages flexibility, recognizing that what works for one individual may not work for another. It leads educators, therapists, and policymakers to experiment carefully, to observe outcomes honestly, and to adjust when needed rather than clinging to predetermined models. Humility also tempers expectations, reminding us that improvement is possible, but perfection is not, and that progress may come slowly and unevenly. This realistic attitude is far more helpful than grand promises that eventually lead to disappointment. At a deeper level, humility is an ethical stance. Autism confronts us with the complexity of human diversity, and pretending to have all the answers diminishes both the condition and the people who live with it. To be humble is to acknowledge that each person on the spectrum is a mystery, shaped by biology, environment, and individuality in ways that cannot be fully mapped. It is to recognize that every act of support, or research is provisional, always subject to refinement, always open to new insight. This humility does not paralyze us. Rather, it keeps us honest, careful, and compassionate in our pursuit of understanding. Oversimplification is one of the greatest dangers in how society approaches autism, because it tempts us to reduce a complex human condition to a handful of cliches. People are eager for easy explanations, whether it is saying autism is nothing but a disorder of social skills, or insisting that it is caused by a single factor, or even claiming that all autistic individuals possess savant-like abilities. Each of these narratives strips away the richness of reality. Autism does not fit neatly into one category or one story, and every time we attempt to make it simple, we do violence to the truth and to the lives of those who live with it. Oversimplification is appealing because it feels manageable, but what is lost is accuracy, compassion, and the ability to respond meaningfully to real needs. The problem with oversimplification is that it shapes expectations. If teachers are told that autism always means lack of empathy, they may treat autistic students as incapable of moral understanding, even when that is far from the case. If employers assume autism always includes genius in mathematics or technology, they may ignore the individual who does not fit that stereotype, leaving them excluded from opportunities. The false comfort of a simple definition creates rigid boxes, and people who do not conform to those boxes are misunderstood or left behind. Real individuals disappear under the weight of caricatures. This danger also extends into public policy and health care. When policymakers rely on oversimplified views, they design one size fits all interventions that may help a few but fail many. Funding may be directed only toward the most visible aspects of autism, while neglecting the subtler but equally important challenges. For instance, if autism is framed purely as a childhood disorder, support systems for adults are overlooked, leaving them without resources once they age out of school programs. Oversimplification not only distorts perception, but also undermines the creation of effective solutions. At a personal level, oversimplification erodes compassion. When people think they already know what autism is, they stop asking questions, they stop listening, and they stop paying attention to the unique struggles and strengths of each individual. A parent might dismiss their child's distress as just autism, instead of looking deeper into what is causing the difficulty. A friend might avoid reaching out because they assume social connection is unwanted. These responses are not born of cruelty but of ignorance shaped by simplified narratives. Yet the harm is real nonetheless. The antidote to oversimplification is nuance. It requires us to accept that autism is complicated, variable, and unpredictable, and that no single definition will suffice. This means paying attention to both science and lived experience, resisting the urge to generalize, and remaining open to the unexpected. It means recognizing that one person's autism is not another's, and that individuality matters more than stereotype. By resisting oversimplification, we preserve the integrity of truth and maintain the compassion necessary to meet people where they actually are, rather than where our easy stories suggest they should be. Autism presents itself as both a challenge and a profound window into human diversity, and it is in this duality that its significance truly lies. On the one hand, there is no denying that autism brings difficulties, barriers in communication, struggles with social understanding, sensory sensitivities that make ordinary environments overwhelming, and rigid patterns of behavior that can hinder adaptability. These challenges can limit opportunities, create isolation, and place burdens not only on individuals, but also on families and communities striving to provide support. Yet to stop, there is to miss something vital, because autism also represents a unique perspective on what it means to be human. It broadens the range of cognitive and emotional experiences we recognize as part of our shared existence, reminding us that there is no single correct way of perceiving or engaging with the world. Human societies thrive on diversity. We know this in terms of culture, language, and tradition, and the same principle applies to cognitive diversity. People on the autism spectrum often notice details that others overlook, approach problems from unconventional angles, and pursue interests with a level of intensity that can produce remarkable insights. These traits, though often accompanied by difficulties in other areas, contribute to the richness of collective knowledge and creativity. A society that fails to recognize this risks depriving itself of valuable contributions that emerge precisely because some minds operate differently. Autism therefore challenges us to redefine the boundaries of normalcy, not by lowering standards, but by expanding our appreciation for varied forms of intelligence and expression. Seeing autism as part of human diversity also changes how we think about inclusion. Instead of treating autism solely as a condition to be corrected or minimized, we can recognize it as a difference to be understood and accommodated. This perspective does not romanticize the hardships. It acknowledges them fully, but it refuses to reduce individuals to their struggles alone. Just as we provide ramps for those with mobility impairments, we can provide sensory, friendly environments, flexible communication methods, and workplaces that value different cognitive styles. Inclusion then becomes less about charity and more about justice, creating spaces where people can contribute according to their strengths without being excluded because of their challenges. The presence of autism in society also invites reflection on deeper philosophical questions. What does it mean to be fully human? Is humanity defined by conformity to majority traits, or by the breadth of experiences encompassed within our species? Autism suggests the latter. It reminds us that human variation is not merely incidental, but essential. Each person on the spectrum embodies a different way of engaging with reality, and by listening to them, we expand our own understanding of the human condition. The difficulties they face highlight the limits of systems designed for uniformity, while their strengths reveal new possibilities for creativity, empathy, and resilience. In this sense, autism is both a challenge demanding practical solutions and a perspective enriching the larger human story. To embrace it as such is to recognize that diversity is not a problem to be solved, but a resource to be cultivated, and that the presence of different kinds of minds strengthens society as a whole. So, what do we actually know about autism? We know enough to recognize its challenges, enough to see its potential, and enough to admit that our understanding is still incomplete, and that humility, paired with compassion, is the only way forward. Because autism is not just a clinical category, it is a reminder of the vast diversity of human life, and how much stronger we become when we learn to value every way of being human.